Well, welcome. You're joining me here today in Bradford, in sunny West Yorkshire. First time I've been to Bradford, although I've been to Bradford District before. Of course, Haworth, one of our favourite destinations, is in Bradford District. But in terms of Bradford City Centre, this is the first tour that I've kind of done here, so it's fantastic to come to Bradford for the first time. And how appropriate, given it's now the Year of Culture. So we're talking about that a little bit later on in the tour. But I wanted to start off here, which I think is a sort of symbolically important place in Bradford. I'm just going to spin the camera around for us to show you this mural here. And it is a mural that was painted to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the Independent Labour Party here in Bradford on January the 13th, 1893. Now, I've lost the gimbal already, so let me just start again. This is the problem at times with running the K button gimbal when you point upwards, is it has a habit of doing exactly what it just did then. So just bear with, and we'll try and go with that again. So hand upwards. There we go. So, in the 19th century, working conditions for factory workers in the UK were pretty harsh. Working out along, conditions were poor, and the use of child labour was very common. And Bradford had a particularly bad conditions as the city kind of expanded rapidly from a largely rural community to a large city with many woolen warehouses. And a number of local MPs had kind of advocated change. And then in 1890, the United States imposed a tariff on foreign cloth. And this led to tariffs, very common, led to a general cut in wages throughout the British textile industry. And it led to a strike in Manningham Mills, which is the largest mills around here. So eventually the workers were kind of starved back to work. But the Independent Labour Party was formed because the kind of realisation that the workers needed representation if their conditions were to improve. And just next to it here is a kind of contemporary sculpture. And whilst I haven't actually read about this or seen it, it does appear to me that this giant here, who's sort of getting up to his feet, is about the labour movement, is people kind of coming together and finding strength together. So I think that's what that's kind of all about. So hello, Polly. So I'm afraid it's boo hiss at the start of this to the good folks of the USA for imposing a tariff on us. So don't believe that tariffs don't do damage, folk. But let's get a move on. So although the kind of party formed here in Bradford, it soon spread kind of nationwide. And when the National Labour Party, the party now in kind of government, formed in 1906, the Independent Labour Party affiliated with it. But they found the Labour Party kind of rather too timid in its ideas. Many would feel the same today. I'm not going to comment on that. And so they split from them in 1912. Now, the Independent Labour Party then went on to oppose both world wars. And this was a very unpopular position. It obviously held close to their principles, but it caused them to lose a lot of support. And from them on, they were never a kind of mainstream organisation. Again, they were kind of at the margins of British politics, whilst of course the Labour Party kind of went on to become a party of government, albeit the second party in this country. And the Independent Labour Party ended up disbanding in 1975. But it started here. So the roots of the kind of labour movement are here in Bradford, and it is very much a city that's kind of characterised by kind of class struggle, by rich, by power and poor, the powerful and the powerless. And it's a kind of narrative that really kind of continues on into this era. But what we've got is, sort of two cities here. A modern version, you can see, not especially pretty, but we're about to kind of dive into some of the finest architecture to be found anywhere in Yorkshire, in the north. And it is a legacy of the Victorian sort of uber developments of Bradford. And so having talked and started really thinking about labour and the needs of the workforce, this kind of next architectural legacy really is about capital. What capital builds, how it kind of responds to opportunity. And what's fascinating in Bradford is it isn't simply about commerce, it's also about architecture, because every opportunity that they could, they built things that were quite stunningly beautiful. So we're coming into an area known as Little Germany, you may have heard of, and most of these buildings you're going to see were kind of constructed. It's part of the legacy of kind of commerce and industry. So they were mostly constructed for the use of textile businesses, although there were a few kind of non-commercial buildings. For example, the Baptist and Methodist chapels down here. But the commercial sort of buildings are a legacy of the merchants from mainland Europe. So many of them were Jewish, who spent large sums of money constructing imposing warehouses for the storage and their sale of their goods for export. So a large portion of these merchants came from Germany, hence the name Little Germany. So I'm just going to stop for a minute and just let you kind of take in the quality of American Eagle on this one, hinting of course at trade, the transatlantic trade. But to be honest, we could be in Paris. The quality of the buildings, the architecture, the ambition, the finishing, and bear in mind that these are light as well, fabulous time of day, is, you know, they're commercial buildings. They're not shop buildings. Hello, Casey, I'm lovely to have you on from... I will respond to your email, by the way, I did see that the other day. Thank you for that. But isn't it just delightful? It is kind of commerce, but it's using vision as well, isn't it, to create a cityscape. So kind of Bradford had become more attractive as a centre of international trade in the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War. So France and Germany sort of told up each other in 1870, kind of prelude, or the first round of what was become the wars of the 20th century. And so, you know, in doing so, a lot of Germans kind of settled over here because there's a disruption of commercial relationships between France and Germany. They're not talking to one another. So consequently, you know, what we see is a relocation and settling over here. Little Germany, it's a much bigger area, and it's all kind of ripe for repurposing, regeneration. You've got architectural practices down here, including famously Lockwood and Mawson, who we're going to talk about on the tour. We're in the north part of Birmingham. I guess I don't really know the geography of Birmingham well enough to say, Laurie, but we're in Little Germany right now. The centre of it is kind of below and to the left. But this sort of cityscape around here, in the street after street of this, has been used a lot in TV and filming. So they filmed part of All Creatures Great and Small here in 2001. It was used to portray Moscow, believe it or not, during Queen Elizabeth's visit to Russia in season 5 of The Crown. So if you've been watching The Crown, season 5, Queen Elizabeth goes to Moscow, filmed right here in Little Germany, in Bradford. And we're told this area is used extensively in the filming of an upcoming Peaky Blinders movie. So if you're any fans of Peaky Blinders on there, amongst you, do look out for it, because this, when you see the film, this is where it was done. So lots of kind of opportunity for sort of development, really, but it's ultimately, you know, it is already magnificent, because this legacy of very, very fine buildings has created a space for creative business, for kind of new media, obviously for kind of residential as well, and it's only going to fly, I think, in the years to come, you know, because I think this is probably the city with the best prospects for regeneration in Yorkshire. You know, Yorkshire defined by 5 cities: Leeds, York, Hull, Bradford and Sheffield. But I don't think there's anywhere else in Yorkshire that has got this kind of quality of buildings right now underutilised, kind of right in the city centre, that could totally drive. And unfortunately, of course, the byproduct of that all too often ends up being that you know, people are kind of driven out of those kind of neighbourhoods. But putting that to kind of one side, it is one hell of a space. So kind of amidst this explosion of commercial activity, you've also got, you know, this explosion of non-conformist faith. So I think we'll walk around this way. I'm not so familiar with this bit. I think both ways will take us round to the cathedral, but it's probably a nice way of kind of getting there. And yeah, a lot of kind of non-conformist faith. So, you know, Quakerism, Methodism, and so forth. These sort of sub-faiths that are broken away from kind of mainline Anglican faith to were very, very popular amongst the working class, particularly the urban working classes. And so Bradford, sort of being a city that only really emerges in the 19th century, doesn't have the traditional central cathedral. It doesn't have a kind of Anglican palace. The cathedral, such as it is, I think I've gone the right way, yeah, here it is, has only really been a cathedral designated since 1919. So consequently, it's a very fine church that derives from the medieval period. So I'll come around this bit, and then once you come down here, it's It's a lot prettier, because the thing with Bradford is, I suppose why I've been in between, which is you can film lots of lovely things, but then you've got sort of less attractive things in between them. So what we're looking at right now is an early 20th century extension at the end here of Bradford Cathedral. I say it became a cathedral designated in 1919. So consequently, we're not in the centre of Bradford. We're kind of up at the top, and so it hasn't got that sort of commanding central location you'd expect to find sort of cathedral close, as you might say, in the heart of the city. But it is still an interesting building, worthy of note. It's been used as a site of Christian worship here since the 7th century. So very, very early on in the sort of conquest, if you like, not reconquest, the conversion rather of the British Isles done by monks. So where have we got to? Yeah, so we're talking obviously about the church. So the Scots Regulars burned it down in about 1327, and so the church that you're looking at now is 15th and 16th century in construction. The bell tower that ended in the early years of the 16th century. So I'm glad that we are all kind of back together. We're a little bit behind, so let's push on, because we're obviously now a bit late. So I was going to hope to pop in the cathedral, but we'll perhaps just skip that bit. So let me just get a drink now, because I'm a bit stressed now. Amazing where it was, yes. Soundbury, oh, not again. Sounds so very faint. God, I found it so frustrating for you. Something weird, isn't it? Right, see what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put both of them on, and hopefully, what we'll do is we'll go up. Right, can you confirm that that's coming through a bit clearer, and hopefully that will be the end of the issues we've been beset with. Now, it's not a case of close to the mic. It's the mic is right underneath my chin, Diane. It's for whatever reason the relay, I think it's the wire, has developed a crack or a fault. Good. So I'm not doing anything. So what I suspect is there's a bit of a loose connection within the wire. So as I move from side to side, that's probably what's causing it to drop. So we'll do our best to stick at that, and this is the way it'll take us back down to the bottom. So I mean, I don't claim to know the city well. Kind of hands up for that one. My dad was born here, actually, so I think I've kind of got a bit of a flavour of the kind of mindset of Bradfordians. I've met quite a few over the years, and the sort of single topic of conversation, if you kind of engage with them, those that have been here for a long time, tends to be a kind of form of vandalism that's happened architecturally, of what's kind of being ripped out. And you can see, obviously, in this shot here, you've got very much a constant kind of combination of the old and the new. And we say the old is largely Victorian. There's not much here that's much older than Victorian. It's not like York. We've not got medieval, quite simply because it was largely a village throughout the medieval period. But there's very much kind of rolling narrative here that kind of says it's been spoilt. They've ripped out, what was beautiful, and they've replaced it with modern kind of characterless, should we put it that way, buildings. And whilst I've got kind of some sort of sympathy to that, and you kind of understand it, in particular, they talk about the Swan Arcade that has been lost, the city market. But actually, I think it's incredible what still remains. I think it's really impressive how much of the Victorian city is still here. So there's definitely a glass half empty, a glass half full, and it kind of depends where you choose to put yourself on that sort of continuum, I guess you call it, as to whether you're seeing this as something with lots of nice buildings, or that the nice buildings are somewhat spoiled because interspersed amongst them are modern I'm not going to say characterless buildings, but just contemporary buildings. So, I mean, you can make your own decision about that, really. I'm not going to sort of say, because I'm not from here. But I think there are very many buildings here that kind of really epitomise Victorian urban grandeur. And so that's what I'm going to try and focus the rest of the tour here. But I just want to take you up by the cathedral to kind of have a look. And as you say, the light's going down. So hopefully by the time we hit the centre at the end, we will have some attractive sky. So coming in, I've got the Midlands Hotel here. I'm going to cross over if I can. This is the only criticism, really, of Bradford. Like Leeds, it's given over to the car. It's not sort of built on a pedestrian scale. I'm so used to York, whereby the pedestrian takes precedence and cycles and so forth. And here, that doesn't feel like that. So there is a sense that you are in jeopardy. London matches that dichotomy well. I think you're right, and I think there's a lot here that reminds you, KCM, of London in terms of the buildings, but also that kind of cheap by gel modernity with kind of classical Victorian. So, as I say, I'm guilty, as anybody else, of kind of thinking what's gone. But here, I think you really need to celebrate kind of what is still here. And I think a story on the city centre provides an opportunity to see the modern development and the remaining Victoriana. So let's celebrate both if we can. So the first of these wonderful listed buildings, or the next perhaps is a better way of putting it, is the Midland Hotel. And this is one of a series of hotels, again, to me, could be in Paris, that were run by the Midland Railway Company. There's one in Manchester, there's one in Leeds. They were, wherever they had kind of stops, they would put an upmarket hotel so that the travelling well-to-do had somewhere they could say, it's not quite as well-to-do, that's 3-star rather than a 5-star, but nonetheless it's still very grand on the inside. It began in 1885, took 5 years to complete, and it was here because the original Forster Square station was the kind of the main station operating for Bradford. It's now kind of moved to Bradford Interchange, so it's kind of in the wrong position, as you might say. But let us just kind of pan up and give you a sense that light is catching beautifully now. So this was a kind of showpiece for the northern headquarters. The architect was a chap called Charles Trubshaw, who designed many railway stations, Midland Railway Company. And this is very much the golden age of steam, as you might say, the kind of glamorous age. But obviously, as that era began to a close, and the station moved, the lines moved, the hotel kind of fell into disrepair until it was brought by a Bradford entrepreneur by the name of John Pennington in 1992, who restored it and reopened as a hotel in 1993. And so throughout its life, it's played host to many famous guests. Those that are into theatre may know of Sir Henry Irving, the most famous actor of his day in the kind of Victorian era. He died here in this very hotel in 1905. So it's certainly got kind of pedigree. It's lovely, isn't it? Really, really charming. And again, the light is just glorious. So let's now walk up Cheapside. So the Midland kind of follows kind of around the corner, and it takes us onto a road by the name of Cheapside. So again, just as we kind of walk on, I'm really just going to try and pan up as much as I can, at the risk of losing the gimbal, just to give you a sense of the kind of the height and the scale of the buildings here. Everything is on almost kind of gigantic scale. So it's very much like Paris. The echoes of New York are in here, with kind of the brownstone, I would say. But everything, of course, is kind of echoing back to an earlier time. A time where kind of buildings were lavished upon with... so Midland Bank, no, it's the Midland Railway Company, rather than Midland Bank. Midland Bank, of course, no longer with us, now part of the Hong Kong and Shanghai, Business Banking Corporation, HSBC. But aren't they wonderful? So this was called Cheapside. So you might be forgiven for thinking Cheapside, says Bradford Forster Square here. So originally this was the main station, but subsequently has been overtaken by Bradford Interchange. So you might think with a name like Cheapside, it indicates that this is an area where poor people lived, which would be a good guess. But actually its meaning is really kind of rather different. It goes beyond that kind of simplicity. And Cheapside is a common name, as the one in London, but quite a lot of town cities have got Cheapside, and it originates from the word cheap. Excuse me, not surprisingly, which is a French word, which means cheap as well, but it means more sort of bargain, because it was a place, also spelled CEPE, and it means a market or a place of bargaining. So consequently, what that does is that gives us a kind of timestamp that at and around the time when this was emerging, this area historically was commercial and trading activity. So a kind of vibrant marketplace in this area, where locals gather to buy and sell. Let's have another drink as we walk up. Hopefully, things are starting to calm down a bit now. So we'll walk up Cheapside, up onto Manor Road for those that like to follow where we're going. And we'll head back down towards the centre of the town and take in some, I think, interesting and certainly visually stimulating buildings on the way. And interesting as well, of course, you've got the contemporary uses. So as we move along, it's perhaps worth having a look and seeing, those are they continue to be offices? Obviously, quite a lot of them are empty still. Bradford has got major kind of regeneration opportunities and ideas going forward. Talk about them in a little bit. But many of the buildings are in use, and they are very interesting. So very, very sort of common and regular in style. A lot of symmetry kind of going on with the design of these buildings, and lots of light, because being used obviously in textiles. Before electric light was common, you would want to flood your work floors with light to enable production to go in. So in 1800, it was just a village. So it had been settled in and around the Norman Conquest, but between the 11th century and the 19th century, not that much happens here. The growth is sort of organic, it's slow, it's developed, so that by 1800, Bradford was a small rural town, 16,000 people, with a solitary steam-powered mill. So compared to the rest of West Yorkshire, Leeds, Huddersfield, Batley, etc., Dewsbury, long, long way behind in terms of its kind of production capacity for textiles. Wool was mostly spun in local cottages and farms. However, during the days, obviously, of the Industrial Revolution, it became the fastest growing city in Britain. And although most kind of people came from the countryside, others came from further afield. And the first kind of large group of immigrants to arrive were the Irish, particularly from the 1840s onwards, the part of Ireland where my family derives from, Mayo, Roscommon, the west of Ireland, particularly impacted by the hunger, came over here. So the first known immigrant community really was the Irish, and they came and got work in the burgeoning growth of the textile mills and a kind of associated factories. And ever since then, sort of from that point onwards, Bradford has been associated with immigrant labour, textiles, and that kind of link. And of course, once you have that workforce, obviously you're moving into kind of wage earning, a kind of cash economy. And as it's been said that kind of Yorkshiremen know a thing or two about saving money. And it certainly can be said about Halifax's Edward Ackroyd. And he founded the Penny Bank in his hometown of Halifax. It's been running for over 165 years, and it's known as the Yorkshire Bank. So Colonel Ackroyd owned large textile mills and complexes in Halifax. And he founded the West Riding Yorkshire Provident Society and Penny Savings Bank in 1859. And Ackroyd was one of these kind of Victorian industrialists who saw it as their duty to improve the conditions of his workers and their families. And by 1861, as the Yorkshire Penny Bank, it had branches across Yorkshire. You're about to see the Bradford branch, just about 100 feet in front of us. So life in Bradford in the early 19th century was uncertain, as people flocked from the countryside to work in the town's mills. And it was also a time where there was quite a lot of kind of financial speculation, with many small banks going under. There wasn't the kind of protection that the Bank of England, the central bank, would offer then, and so smaller banks, private banks, were going under. So there's a sort of suspicion that working people didn't want to put their money into a bank that could collapse. But Ackroyd realised that working people needed safe place to save. And there was a lot of them. So even though they didn't earn much, there was a lot of them. And they just put aside money for sickness, unemployment, and of course old age, because at this time there was no social provision. So he started off the penny bank that was targeted not at the rich, but precisely the opposite. It was to get poor people into the habit of saving. And in the bank's early days, the branch was usually open for one evening a week, and they were in kind of schoolrooms, in church halls. And it wasn't just the workers encouraged to save. In 1865, they opened the first school bank. And when I was at school, we used to bring money every week to the Yorkshire Bank. So that kind of continued on. So here we are. I think is absolutely wonderful, this building. Been a bit of a walk to get up here. But here is the Yorkshire Penny Bank. It dates from the 1860s. But I'd say this is a building that was built to attract the urban working classes, the poor. And yet there's principally no real difference in terms of the architecture here, the investment. It still has that kind of civic pride, that desire to kind of compete and to kind of show off, kind of what is possible. So Ackroyd also kind of recognised the need to support small tradesmen and shopkeepers, and as a result of this, they were the first bank to offer checkbooks. So checkbooks are largely dwindled. This was one of Ackroyd's ideas. He started out with the kind of Yorkshire Penny Bank. And then in 1870, Bradford was hit by a recession, and the Yorkshire Penny Bank opened a soup kitchen here in Bradford. So again, a strong sense here in Bradford, this was unusual, that I could keep sort of coming back to this. Obviously, it's not an accident that the Independent Labour Party came from here, or indeed that today this has the name of kind of city of sanctuary, a welcoming place for immigrants, because sort of cheek by jowl, you've got commercial activity, but you've also got philanthropy, and that's kind of written into, I'd say, the DNA of the buildings. So Edward Ackroyd became MP for Halifax. He was a model employer. He introduced workers' pension schemes and supported many educational institutions, including the first working men's college outside London. And when he died, they say it's a measure, isn't it, Joan, of how well you regard us, is when you die. When he died, 15,000 people turned out to Edward Ackroyd's funeral. Many of them, of course, the urban working classes, those that have been working in his mills, in his place of employment, and many of them, because of him, could thank him really for having some money in the bank. So these are the things that obviously cash is coming out of our fashion. Banks won't change, I suppose, but it's all sort of part of how the world changes, as we move from a predominantly agricultural economy, of the kind of the feudal, the landlord, you're kind of born, you're tied to the land, to one of much of a cash economy. You're exchanging your labour for hard cash, but then it's down to you. The safety net at this stage is almost non-existent. The work is tough, the hours are long. The thought that you're going to get through your life without getting crippled by it is for the birds. But thankfully, again, being Bradford, there is a history of people caring. And often it comes from unlikely areas. So the statue here is a chap called Richard Ostler. He was born in Leeds in 1789, and he was an industrial reformer, known in the north of England as the Factory King. So this guy was responsible for kind of industrial reform. And I just want to bring you up here. I'm not going to film you guys, but I just want to talk about the statue, okay? Yeah, all right. Have a good day. And so from 1813, he conducted a campaign for shorter working hours. So he's one of the first kind of rich guys, really, to say that poor people matter and that their lives matter as much as the rich. They've got hopes and dreams too, and we need to give them a chance to flourish, to get their way ahead. So ideas that seem to be going out of fashion these days. Everyone is on their own these days, but he was in part responsible for the 10 Hours Act of 1847. So under him, he campaigned for restricting the working hours to 10 hours a day. In 1830, after being witness to kind of horrific treatment and 16-hour days of children in the textile mills of Bradford, also worked for the reform of working conditions. And as part of his campaign for the 10-hour working day, he described the use of children in the mills of Yorkshire as Yorkshire slavery. So the Factory Acts of 1833 and 1847, which reduced hours for women and children, owe much to his efforts. He also campaigned against the Poor Law Amendment Act, which set up tougher conditions for the poorest in society. And he was brought up in a Methodist factory. He was a devout Christian and a Tory radical, but he didn't sort of see the world through the eyes of politics, more through the eyes of his Christian faith. So consequently, it was wrong. He believed in the gospel ideas of charity, looking after and enabling the poor. So consequently, it's his belief in the Bible rather than supremacy kind of market forces and free trade. He was also a well-known abolitionist, so against slave trade. He supported William Wilberforce's campaign against slavery. And in 1836, after campaigning tirelessly, Osler's health broke down. Then in 1840, after a series of disagreements fueled by the heated politics of the day, he was dismissed by his employer and spent 3 years in a debtor's prison. So you could fall very far and very, very fast at the time. Yeah, it's a fascinating place, Bradford, because it is a place of, I say of compassion, but also of radicalism. So it's a place where ideas have kind of come forward and flourished, but not just from the left or the right. In fact, I think that those kind of divisions are increasingly misleading and unhelpful to us today, kind of left and right. It's a place where combinations of facts have come forward to produce ideas about how we can be better as a society. So after 3 years in jail, friends kind of paid his debts, and he was later vindicated. And after Osler's death, it was decided that a permanent memorial should be created. So national subscription was raised for the money for that statue, and Bradford was chosen as the most suitable site. Now, it's been moved, that statue. It was on Forster Square near the station, and opened by Lord Shaftesbury in 1869. But it was moved up there in 1868. So I moved on because I don't know if you could sort of see there was some sort of guys, some street drinking guys, and I didn't really want to kind of make them feel they were there first. So I wasn't going to try and sort of push them out the way. I just wanted to kind of negotiate a bit of time where we could just talk and move on. So again, just look at the quality of the buildings. It's that kind of attention to detail that charms us, really. I think that you can look upon this. So I think we come around here into Upper Piccadilly. Should we start to test my knowledge of Bradford? Because I've done this route, I thought, back of a fag packet. I thought, oh yeah, that'll work. But I'm not quite sure the lefts and rights. So I'm pretty sure that's Darlington. So this is Upper Piccadilly. So if we cross over, so everywhere on every corner, you have this grandeur being kind of set out for us to just kind of marvel at, really. So I'm trying to cross the road because it's a wee bit busy, and of course I should have used the crossing like any sensible person would, but nobody sensible will become a tour guide, not a video tour guide. You just kind of push your way into things. So kind of what's interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit about the city culture when we get down to the kind of square, is a lot of people, of course, are pinning a lot of hopes on the future of Bradford and how some culture-led kind of regeneration can really kind of kickstart the economy. Because I suppose out of the kind of the 5 cities of Yorkshire, York, Leeds, Hull, Bradford, Sheffield, Bradford has historically been a bit of a problem child, if you like, in terms of wealth generation, in terms of sort of social issues. But equally, I think it's kind of got many of the ingredients that, if the politics can be right, because so much of this stuff isn't really a failure of cities, it's a lack of confidence, a failure, whatever you call it, of politics, of making the decisions that enable things to flourish. And what's interesting about Bradford is they are kind of keen on arts-led. So this is why, obviously, city culture is sort of foursquare within that. So we're going down Piccadilly, of course, famously Piccadilly in London. They're looking at how the arts can play a major role, the kind of creative community, in obviously generating wealth, employment opportunities. And what's very interesting is, having sort of worked in years gone by around kind of cultural policy and stuff, is it's got one of the things that a lot of cities don't have anymore, which is cheap accommodation. Because ultimately, for the arts to flourish, whether we're talking about the arts of fine art, painting, we're talking about learning to play guitars and bands, or DJing, or whatever it is, clothes making, whatever it is your sort of cultural milieus, you need time and space and a kind of a supportive environment that says, we value what you're doing, take your time. You're not going to build this now. It sort of requires a benign benefit system as well. That's what it's had in years gone by. That's probably off the table anymore, but there can be enterprise grants, there can be support grants, there can be relatively modest amounts of money that can be made available to artists and creatives that enable them to kind of get a step up. And there is actually an arts building down here that I believe is in planning. The culture company is sort of bringing it back in, which is great, because as you can see, these buildings, many of them are empty or underutilised, and there's huge potential to kind of fill them with vibrancy and kind of young people and older people as well, but make it a human-led regeneration. Because I think the problem with so much of regeneration in this country is property-led. Let's smash things down, let's build luxury flats, bring in the millionaires, squeeze out the poor people, and then yada, yada, yada. Yeah, of course the economy goes up, but you've done that by, if you like, displacing poorer people and bringing in richer people. So, you haven't solved anything, you've just simply moved the problem along a bit, haven't you? Whereas I don't think that will happen here in Bradford. I hope it wouldn't happen here in Bradford, because there is so much city centre accommodation that is available. It was 1833 on the Piccadilly Wall, yeah. So hopefully that won't happen here. And that, there can be a blend, as you can see over on this side. You've got the kind of regeneration into buildings. Sarah, talk about the museum. Do you mean the Bowling Hall, the Industrial Museum, Sarah? I think that's perhaps the one you're referring to, the Industrial Museum, which is where all the school kids go, to kind of get obviously a taste of what life was like in the mills. So yes, I've got high hopes really but moderate expectations, if that kind of makes sense. Having been in and around this thinking in Yorkshire, being mill owner of Manningham, became the first sort of museum in Britain to focus on Black and Asian art, fantastic collection of saris and so forth. So they've been pretty canny here in Bradford about getting down to the art that matter to the people. So Carla Sangham, music and dance group for Southeast Asian people, is a huge kind of deal around here. So there is a tradition of kind of ground up, and because obviously the ground up has been influenced by subsequent generations of different immigrants kind of coming through, so that's impacted on the kind of the arts, the food, the culture, and so forth. So I've kind of got, like I say, high hopes really. I think they're not going to have a better opportunity to do. So it's more of the construction, I think, on that side, Rose. You can kind of see what done Piccadilly. So now we're going to sort of turn into, from the sort of shabbier to the frankly stunning again, as we come down one of the favourite streets in Bradford, Peace Hall Yard. And Peace Hall, by the way, Peace, spelled P-E-C-E, like Halifax, we've got the Peace Hall soon in Halifax this year, is about cloth production. So pieces of cloth were made often by women working at home with spinning wheels, looms, weaving, whatever they were doing, but doing it at home with the kids around them. It was very much a kind of domestic industry. You then sell the pieces, those pieces could then be stitched together and sold then as to whatever cloth or whatever kind of product. So that's what the pieces were for a Peace Hall. But right here in the centre of this, Peace Hall Yard number 1, is the famous Bradford Club. So the Bradford Club was, if you like, the drinking space, the social space of the great luminaries of the day. So Titus Salt, famous industrialist and a philanthropist, he was a past president here. Delius was a member. So the great and the good, it continues to be the Bradford Club here. So cottage industry, absolutely, Dawn, yeah. But those people then were the ones that changed the game. So they didn't just physically join up the pieces of fabric selling. They joined up their ideas and thought, we need to transform this industry. And this industry was transformed by getting rid of the cottage industry, as Dawn so correctly puts it. The Industrial Revolution blows away those in favour of kind of gigantic mills. And of course, we mustn't forget within that the social impact of that. Because for centuries, you'd had mostly women employed in textiles, working at home with their children around them. And suddenly, the capitalists, the textile owners, decide it's far more productive. There's a lot more money for them to leave their homes and to work in the big textile sheds in the factories. So you've got a big uprooting of the social fabric. This kind of kicks off and starts like one by one very quickly. But it kind of starts with these guys going, we need to make more profit. The cottage industry model just doesn't work. We need to escalate. And this cottage industry, of course, had worked for centuries, right through the kind of medieval era. But the place they loved to hang out more than anywhere else was the building that's in front of us here. The masters kind of driving this change operate from this building. And this building in front of us here with the glass side of it is the Wool Exchange. Now, I've put this on Facebook before and said this is my very favourite bookshop. And I'd love to go film in there, but we might get thrown out. And I don't know if it's 4G. So I think I'll just stand in the doorway and just try and give you a hint. But we'll just go through. But you can obviously see it is a fabulous building. So this was a trading centre where kind of textiles, where a gentleman's word was his bond. Nothing was kind of written down. It was all done with a kind of handshake, a nod and a smile. And there was 2 restaurants in the basement. That's where kind of the bulk of the business was kind of done. But you got this kind of spectacular sort of cathedral to commerce and to the textile industry. That is, sorry, sound on off. I'll try again. So I think it's this cable, so I do apologise. I'll buy a new cable in time for the next tour. But obviously there's not much I can do about it right now. But hopefully the visuals will give you something to look at. So when they came to build this, the kind of people of Bradford, the upper echelons of society, called kind of leading thinker John Ruskin in to advise them, to sort of say, give us a lecture, tell us what we should be doing with this building. And they kind of clearly got more than they bargained for, because in a now kind of famous polemical work that was named Traffic, Ruskin announced straight away, I do not care for this exchange of yours. He accused them of trying to buy taste by using him as a fashion advisor for kind of good architecture, but not actually caring themselves. So I'll just give you a little kind of peek in. So I'm not going to kind of step inside, but just so you can kind of just get hopefully a little bit of a sense of the bookshop. It's absolutely kind of magnificent. And you see it to the Star of David's up at the top. Very strong links up to the Jewish community. So I'm not going to. We'll have a look at the porticos on. So he kind of accused them of trying to buy taste. So he kind of challenged them to think about themselves, but also he wants them to be aware that they are in the awe of what he calls the goddess of getting on. So Mammon, as you might say. That they are focused on money and not people. And he compares their desire to spend a paltry sum on the exchange with their treatment of the workers. So basically, they get him in and say, give us a steer on how to make a fine building. And he basically accused them of being cheap, of abusing staff, not really caring, and that he's wasting his time being amongst them. So I'm not going to try going in door because I'll do it by the door. But obviously, if I get a complaint, I could be taken down from YouTube. So Waterstone's a big company, and I can't afford to upset them. So his view is all well and good doing something that's very pretty from above, but when seen from below, it looks like exploitation. Then you aren't actually true to your values. So consequently, he gives them a bit of a kicking, but he just kind of points them in the right direction, and he points them towards this kind of Gothic style. And I think you'll agree. I'll just kind of come around these steps, and we'll walk around the side. It is a very impressive building, indeed. Sarah being there all day is fabulous. So it's very reminiscent of quite a lot of buildings across the north. The Assize Court in Manchester, it resembles the Wool Exchange. And a competition was held to choose the architects. And the people that were picked were called Lockwood and Mawson. And more than anyone else, Lockwood and Mawson, the architects, if you'd like define the style of Victorian Bradford, they are the kind of tastemakers in cheap. So they're kind of like the Pugins, you know, about him who does the architecture of the House of Parliament and so forth in London. Beautiful kind of Gothic archway. So everything is Gothic. We've got a statue on this side of King Edward III, on the other side of the bishop. So they emerged victorious, Lockwood and Mawson, and because they are so interested in the Gothic, they kind of use that as the kind of basis for the stonework. So again, just have a look at the entrance. It really is a fab place to be. As I say, it is a Waterstones. So it is a bookshop. There's a cafe in here as well. So there's every excuse to come along. We'll come around this side as well, so you can have a look from this side. Like I say, I'll try and ask permission if I can. I'd love to do a proper tour down here. rather than just kind of pop in. But what I don't want to do is just kind of burn my bridges before I even start approaching them by just annoying them and them just have to say no then, because that's kind of counterproductive. But if you have a look at this side here, there's a sense of it like it's a Venetian palace. So it's Gothic revival, obviously. Original Gothic is medieval. But you've got a multitude of Gothic detail going on here. You've got the lovely two-tone with the stone in the arches. You've got, as I say, on the inside, you've got a sense really of it being, I mean, at the top is like the Doge's Palace in Venice, but also, and I can't remember the names of the three of them, I think Arcadian's the bottom one, you've got like a cathedral where you've got 3 layers of windows, so it's kind of flooding light in. And of course, those that are kind of cynical, you know, are going to say this is a cathedral to commerce, where people have forgotten about God and Christianity and charity and all these kind of things, and instead are worshipping sort of finance. And of course, the great moguls of the age are kind of being pictured along the sides there. So, you know, but you've got a lot of very, very cool details. They call these, what do you call these little things? Quatrefoil and sexfoil, ocular openings. So you see there, if you look above the way you see the W waterstones, if you look at the window, you see 6 little flower petals, and the one above 4. So the 6 is a sexfoil, and the 4 is a quatrefoil. It wasn't a church, Dawn, that's the thing. It looks like a church, but it's built as a place of doing business. So as I say, it's this sense that, you know, you create a place of doing business, but you're echoing places of religion that in many respects that capitalism had become trade, commerce was the new religions that were dominating Victorian society, and that, you know, notably without a cathedral in its city centre, in effect, this triangular building here is Bradford Cathedral. But it's a cathedral to wool and to the commerce rather than to Christianity faith. Does that kind of make sense? It's a really kind of, I know it's a bit of a strange concept to kind of get our heads around, but that to me is what it's speaking to. It's also about this certainty of being right. There's a confidence here, isn't there? That says we are the kingmakers, we are the people that make these decisions that change the world. And they thought they were right, and yet within a pretty short period of time, Bradford's textile industry had all but collapsed. So it's quite remarkable, really. But I think it's incredible. So I'm going to ask permission and see if we can come down here at some point and do a tour. So I think if we go down Bank Street here, we can go and see other buildings. So I do hope you're enjoying this tour. Apologies with a bit of sound disruption here and there, but hopefully the visuals are making up for that. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So as you can see, it really is on every street corner that we've got these very, very high quality buildings. So if the sound is really bad, I may well just do a vocal track above the film, and then put it like that on Facebook, not Facebook, on YouTube. But I'll have to have a listen to it when I get back, because obviously some people are saying the sound's been poor, others that it hasn't really been an issue for them. So until I go back and actually have a listen to the recording, I won't actually know how bad and how impacted it is. But so the next major building in Bradford we're going to look at kind of set the template for much of what followed, most of what followed really, insofar as it's the first one. It's the daddy of all of these Victorian buildings. And it's still used today, as many of them are. We're going to look at the town hall. You know, there's a quick view of the town hall over there. So we're heading next. We're going to look at St George's Hall first. And it's still in use today, St George's Hall. I've seen a few gigs there over the years. Pretty good place to see a band. I tend to go more to Leeds than Bradford because it's just easier to get there and back from York. But you know, if a band's playing, very happy to come down. And generally speaking, if a band's here and playing, for me it would be St George's Hall. So I've been here maybe half a dozen occasions to see bands over the years. It's a great venue. And here we are coming into. So again, it reminds me a lot of the Liverpool buildings, the Three Graces. We've all been to together. So I know you'll kind of, I'm sure, have some kind of memory of those. Just again, just very, very grand. This is the ambition, really. So this is still in operation as a music venue, cultural venue. And this is Lockwood and Mawson's first major commission. So the people that had done the wool exchange, this was their first contribution to architecture in the city. So in many respects, this is the beginnings. This is the template. This is the building that kind of starts it all. It was raised by public subscription. So in other words, people of the town put money into it to have it built. And it included money donated by local businessmen and German wool merchants, whose presence in Bradford had kind of contributed greatly to success and the wealth of the town. Amongst those merchants was Titus Salt. It's a famous, we need to go to Saltaire as well. It's another place we've yet to go to, but it's another wonderful place here in Bradford. And the architects were sort of concurrently involved in doing this, but also Saltaire at the same time. So they work on both. So incredibly, Lockwood and Mawson, incredibly influential around these kind of parts. So it's a neoclassical Italianate style. So we've got the rough stone at the bottom, called rough because it's sort of textured rather than poor quality. But then we've got the columns up at the top. Very, very similar to the Mansion House in London. It's got that very, very kind of similar style. The Bank of England is very similar. The Royal Exchange in London looks very, very similar to this. So it's a neoclassical Italianate style. And it was deemed sort of suitable for many public buildings. They kind of felt that this carried weight, as you might say. That this was the style, the house style of buildings. So consequently, it is much imitated. I'm just going to pan around this way, and then we're going to go into the square, have a look at the town hall and the mirror pool, and see what else we've got time for. So yeah, look, it's very similar to the Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool. If you know that, that's at the town hall. So it really is. So Leeds Town Hall, similar, Huddersfield Railway Station, are the ones that they did. So all variations really on this theme. And as I say, the St George Hall in Liverpool, kind of very similar. But it's great, this is sort of cultural asset, because as you can see here, we've now got Bradford as the city of culture. So let's just, let's talk about that, because it's appropriate, obviously. What's kind of nice is the Victorian buildings are still contributing to the cultural life of the city, insofar as that's where you can go and see shows, music, musicals, and so forth. So, it's a kind of nice, to me, entwining between the sort of the contemporary and the kind of Victorian. So I welcome you to Bradford for 2025, the UK City of Culture. Now, in a very kind of Bradford way of things aren't quite ready, but actually they're a lot more ready than I kind of thought they were going to be. For years, Bradford's sort of problem child has been exemplified by the fact that its urban regeneration, particularly the roads networks and so forth, and the centre of the city have been very, very slow to progress. But thankfully that is all now largely done. There's still obviously big centre areas that are being kind of redeveloped, and I'm sure this was all meant to be done in time for the beginning of the City of Culture. But actually a lot of it is done, and when we get to the other side of the town hall, we're going to see, the City Hall rather, we're going to kind of see obviously the kind of the mirror pool and a lot that is developed. So Bradford sort of succeeded as the City of Culture, built to last, absolutely, following Coventry, the current holder of the title. And those behind the city's bids believe it will generate 700 million and create 3,000 jobs. And they're very much looking to your young people. This is Britain's youngest city. And the creative and the arts to play a kind of major role kind of within that. So consequently, the Clock Tower is wonderful. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So this landmark year is set to deliver more than 1,000 new performances and events, including 365 artist commissions and a kind of series of major arts festivals, as well as national and international collaborations. So I hope to pop back this year. We'll do a few Bradford tours, I think, this year. Take you to places we've not seen. Maybe go to Cartwright Hall, go to Saltaire, and we'll try and feature as much of Bradford as possible in this year where they're kind of celebrating. But I thought, as we'll come round here, as I say, struck by a sense that so much isn't finished. What's lovely is all this at the front of the town hall is finished. And I'll bring you over to see something that I think is very cool indeed, which is the mirror pool. Yeah, the clock tower there. It really is a building, a place of incredible buildings. We'll talk about that momentarily, but I just want to come over here first just take you to see a couple of bits that sort of surround, because we're sort of right in the epicentre now of Bradford. Just 2 nights ago, this is where the fabulous kind of opening ceremony was held by Bradford musician, which is a shame, because that means that we're not able to see the fountains and so forth, but I suspect it's because of this sub-zero weather. But when we go later in the year, you'll see it, because you've got the highest waterfall in Britain is here. And what's really cool about the mirror pool is it fills up over the day. So consequently, normally at dusk, it's kind of its fullest, but obviously because of the weather, I guess it's not been used. But this is a big water pool, and hopefully I'm backed on. And right in the centre, of course, it gives us opportunities to look at all sides of the square. So it's pretty cool actually that there's no water here, so you can walk right through the middle of it. Now, in and amongst these wonderful buildings, there is this sort of slight oddity, which is the Magistrates' Court. Now, this has been kind of made possible. There used to be the Leeds Police HQ here, right in the centre, kind of where we're stood now. And they demolished that, and there was a hole for probably 10 years. And obviously now they've filled that in with the mirror pool. But what's really cool, what's interesting rather, is that the money ran out, the scheme became too ambitious, and so the Magistrates' Court was left behind. But interestingly, there are those that will say that this is a prime example of brutalist architecture. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I am hugely knowledgeable about brutalist architecture, but for those that like such things, this was designed and opened in 1972 by an architect called William Clifford Brown. I say it was originally joined onto the police station. It's a very big blocky affair. Done by city architects. So at that time, urban architecture very much tended to favour sort of concrete. But actually it looks like it's concrete brutalist, but actually it's largely stone. And I think this is kind of seen as a sort of saving grace. It doesn't actually get in the way, it doesn't impede the views of the town hall. And obviously, as I say, were it not for this weather, I think, we'd have water here. Obviously it doesn't impede the views over there. So it's going to stay, which is interesting, because originally it was slated this wasn't going to be part of it. So in a very kind of Bradford sort of way of things. So Will Alsop, who's a kind of guy that whenever you got money for regen, you bring in Will Alsop, and he costs loads, and he does these manic ideas that are so wonderful. They get everyone talking, but they're so impractical that they never kind of get sued for saying this. You know, they very rarely, should we put it this way, get implemented in full. So they get scaled back a bit, Will Alsop plans. But nonetheless, they sort of kept in the big idea really, which was to kind of create this central sort of space which really allows the town hall to shine. And I think that they've kind of done that really, that they've succeeded in that. But there are some other really kind of important buildings around here that have very much kind of contributed to the kind of city of culture. So we'll just have a little walk up here, and so again you've got City Park here. So this is the City Park, it's called, this area. We've got sort of modern buildings. So there's a combination really for the historic and the modern, and for those sort of in between, like the old Odeon, Bradford Alive, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we'll go up here. I wanted to kind of just show you up by the Media Museum, because this is definitely one of the most important cultural establishments here in Bradford. So like a lot of master plans, really cost spiralled, and just peel it back a little bit. But people do argue it's dignified and restrained. Dawn doesn't like it. I appreciate that, but for amongst the cognoscenti, they call them, don't they? Those that know and appreciate these things will tell you it's a very fine example indeed. But anyway, we'll just get a drink and then we'll talk about the next bit. And a very famous figure. So we're going to leave the city square to visit another of the iconic modern buildings. But on the way to this kind of futuristic, shiny building behind you, see the IMAX, the Media Museum, there's a kind of statue I want to kind of show you. And it's a proud son of Bradford by a chap by the name of John Boynton Priestley, better known, of course, as J.B. Priestley. And he's one of Britain's most cherished literary figures. He was born and raised in a comfortable, affluent so upper middle class Bradford, in the Manningham area, which is an area that subsequently became associated with kind of urban sort of poverty and deprivation. But in his day, it was very, very affluent. Just going to find a place where I can hopefully safely get across this road, because there's a lot of vehicles, so I think we might have to go down here. And he kind of warmly celebrates his northern roots through his works. They kind of shine through. And he is both a dramatist, a playwright, he's a novelist, he's an essayist, he is a political polemicist. So, you know, he has his fingers in kind of a lot of pies, as you might say, did old John Priestley. He's particularly noted these days for The Good Companions, written in 1929, so written at a time of the Great Depression, where living standards were collapsing, and there's a great deal of peril about people's kind of what the future was going to be for people. It's sleeve northern literature, so that's kind of. But he's more famous now for his play, which is An Inspector Calls, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of. It is kind of one of the kind of go-to production of anyone who's been involved in amateur dramatics. It's very easy to do Inspector Calls. Just a few you sit around a table with some dinner clothes and you can get away with that. It's cheap to put on. But particularly since Stephen Daldry's production, which actually started in York, believe it or not, in the 80s, it has kind of become a much-loved theatre production, multi-award winning, been on in London, I think about 20 years now. And it's a fascinating story. For those that kind of don't know, it's about a family ostensibly very wealthy. He's a mill owner. The mother is a leading light in the charity sector. And they sit down for dinner to celebrate the coming together, the engagement of their daughter to marry the owner of a rival mill. And everything before they sit down is about certainty. It's about feeling that what they've attained, this position in life, this respectability, is there forever. They are the gods. So a bit like talking there earlier about this sort of cathedral of the Wool Exchange. That's what Priestley's writing about. He's writing about it from the 1940s, looking backwards to an earlier era. But he's kind of castigating them for being arrogant in their belief that the privileges that they had were cemented there forever. But also, it is an extreme critique of how people are treated. And without sort of plot spoilers, in case you kind of don't know, their world comes crashing down in one night, because one by one they all find themselves implicated in the death of a young woman, or so we're told. And it's the examination of the idea as to whether ultimately we have a greater responsibility to one another. He was a committed socialist. He was writing this at the time where Clement Attlee was transforming this country into a socialist vision after the Homes for Heroes, Brit Health Service in this fall. And he was looking at an earlier time and showing why the dismissiveness of the factory and the capitalists had made it so necessary, because people were treated purely as commodities. So Priestley's kind of play is sort of much loved. It said they love it. The homeless in London, because after people come out of the performance of Inspector Calls, they're very generous in their kind of donations. But it stood the test of time. It's set in the past, which is obviously a good thing, so it doesn't kind of doesn't date so well. But there's something about the unscrupulous gaze of the inspector that has very fundamental questions about society posed that are equally true today. And it can seem a kind of metaphor for today, really, insofar as that if we look at society, and I should get a bit political here, I don't mean to, not party political, but that there are those here in Bradford, or rather those that look upon Bradford, that see it as a failure because of immigration. They believe that whatever possibilities there were for Bradford have been swept away because, it has become, it's not English anymore. All these things. And of course, it's complete baloney. Bradford has always been a place, whether it was the Irish, whether it was the Jews, whether it was Germans, Polish after the war. there's been generation after generation of immigrants. People just seize upon it for their own political advantage, particularly at times of economic difficulties. But I think what's also interesting is that for our hubris, those of us that see ourselves perhaps as liberal, thought these issues had been sorted. We thought we'd move past issues around gender, around race, and we haven't. We obviously need to kind of confront that and think about what that means for our kind of societies. So Priest is a good one to kind of come back to. Of course, if you're not familiar with it, do kind of check it out. But he was a great figure, but he's also a really fun guy as well. He was very happy to talk about his absolutely unquenchable sexual desires. He wasn't the kind of bookish kind of guy that there was no good with women. He was quite the opposite. He really was a player, as you might say. Usually a pipe in his hand, but quite the character. But he stands in front of the National Media Museum. Now, again, we can't go in here, but thankfully what we can do, hopefully, is show you through the window a special installation that's been put in for the Media Museum here, which is a pair of the wrong trousers. So those are familiar with the works of Wallace and Gromit. You can see up here with the penguin. So Nick Park's Animation Studios over in Bristol have gifted to the museum a pair of the wrong trousers there to put up on the wall. So the Media Museum is a kind of real success story of Bradford. By the 1960s, the textile industry was struggling to kind of compete with cheap imported cloth from Asia. And it faced an uncertain future. And this is where you get the first shoots of Bradford's cultural regeneration emerge. So originally this site was going to be a theatre. That's what the kind of built it was to be a theatre. And it was well down the road. In fact, if you're going to build a museum, you wouldn't build something like this. You wouldn't build it on multiple floors. Museums tend to be on a sort of flat level. That's what you kind of do to make it work. But when production kind of ground to a halt, rather, construction, there'd already been built all these kind of different layers. So when it was decided in the 1980s that instead what they were going to have to do was to try and convert it into this media museum, a museum initially of sort of film, of technology, of television, but like the science behind it, how do you project what's happening in a film camera, all those kind of things, the sort of science behind the creation. They had to accommodate something being built for dress circles and bars, all this and the other. So consequently, it's a museum that kind of operates on different layers, which is very unusual. But it is fantastic. And of course, at the heart of it, because of this, they could put IMAX in. I don't know if anybody's ever been to an IMAX cinema, but IMAX is incredible. I don't know what it stands for, IMAX. But basically, IMAX is like basically 360 cinema. And the cinema in here is 6 stories deep, the screen. So it's absolutely enormous. It's the biggest screen in Britain, one of the biggest, I think, anywhere in Europe. And it is the place. If you want to go and see a film, IMAX, provided you don't get kind of nauseous, IMAX is kind of definitely the way to do it. So, I say it was converted from what was going to be a theatre, all this lovely glass sort of facade was all added on, gives a lovely kind of clean sweep to become National Media Museum. So it opened in the 1980s.
I'm sorry to disturb you.
That's all right, don't worry. I'm live on the internet. Okay. So it opened in 1983, closed down for a while just recently, but it's now back open up, which is fantastic to celebrate the Year of Culture. So it's a lovely sweeping facade. So Ronnie loves IMAX. She's kind of seen it. So I went here to see the Rolling Stones in IMAX, which is incredible. Keith Richards, the sort of size of a building, which looks absolutely incredible. But all sorts of films you can come down and see. So IMAX is great fun. So it's fabulous. Again, I can't go in there. It's part of the National Museum group. You need permission, filming and so forth. And they don't really like the fact that I'm stood outside. But anyway, hopefully I'll be forgiven. But let's kind of walk across the road because another statue here to show you. And it is of Queen Victoria in her pomp. And it's appropriate that Queen Victoria is here because Bradford only became a city in Queen Victoria's time. It became a large municipal borough, but it's under her, in her year of her Diamond Jubilee of 1887, so Gold Jubilee, sorry, so 50 years on the throne, that it was given the status of city. By that stage, it was far and away the biggest municipal borough. So if we kind of come up, I'll try and sort of bring it up so you can try and sort of see the view of what Queen Vic is sort of looking out across the city, now across the space we've just. Very, very grand elevation up here. So obviously now it says Victoria 1837, 1901, but it wouldn't have said that at the time because this statue dates from 1887. And they also complaining what to ask me to it. Probably want to ask what channel it was on. You often get that. People are interested. And it's a shame, but you can't necessarily stop and engage in conversation with people. But sort of looking where she's looking, we'll have a look at the War Memorial in just a moment there. You can sort of see she's looking down, and the case for the city-states was pretty undeniable. They were the largest kind of municipal borough, and at that stage, of course, as well, you know, Britain was the top superpower. You see the lion here. It's actually 1900 is the year where Britain's kind of economy absolutely peaks. That is the point where the sweet spot, if you like, where the empire is paying for itself. Thereafter, and of course, after World War I, it's a disaster. They're making money out of it. From that point onwards, every year since 1991 we've been in decline. So whenever they tell you the economy's booming, they're talking qualified, we are in long-term terminal decline. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, it just means from the high point of where Queen Victoria was here in 1887. But bear in mind, in 1887, Queen Victoria is standing there looking down on its magnificent. By 1893, 6 years later, they're forming the Labour Party because they're saying, all this is only really servicing the needs of the wealthy and the powerful. We need to redress the balance between capital and labour. And of course, ultimately, it was arguments settled that. It was warfare. Leeds, these textile towns, were called upon. The Pals Battalions formed. This one in a few weeks into the war in September of 1914. What became the 16th Battalion, 16th and 18th Battalions, the West Yorkshire Regiment, were formed here in Bradford, the Bradford Pals, and after training up in Costerdale, they moved across initially to Egypt to defend the Suez Canal, but they weren't there for too long before they moved across to France, and thereafter they were in the northern sector of the Somme. Ahead of the 1st of July 1916, the Bradford Pals were given the job of attacking the heavily fortified village of Serre, spelled S-E-R-R-E, which was a pretty horrendous place to be. The roll call at the end of the first day, the attack, coordinated attack at 7 in the morning, of the 1,300 Bradford Pals that set out that day, over 1,050 were registered as killed, missing or wounded in the first day. So in many respects, Bradford lost out on a generation of young men. These young men, these mill workers, were simply erased. The worst day. So over here we've got Queen Victoria looking down in majesty, but over here we've got the portrayal of the reality for so many is that whilst Bradford had been sort of built with merchant know-how, it was through the blood of the working class that its fate was kind of more closely determined. As always, like to spend time in war memorials on these tours, as you know, a particular interest of mine. So we've got a guy from the Navy, a sailor, over here. And Bradford never really recovered. So of course what it meant was, in order to keep the textile industries going, the mill owners started looking at immigration, so more people are brought in. So this idea, of course, then of immigrants, textile owners, you know, all kind of coming together in the. But as we're here to talk about culture rather than other things, looking fab. This is what I wanted to be sort of down here at this sort of time of day, Ronnie Lynn, so that we could enjoy these kind of lights coming up. I was hoping we'd get off the waterfalls. That's not to be. But it's a beautiful theatre, and it's a famous place for pantomime. So for those that are devotees of kind of working class arts, pantomime is kind of right up there, really. And this theatre was built, commissioned by a chap called Fran, and he was the kind of king of pantomime. So the kind of working class arts were very much celebrated here. The musical, the pantomime, which is again, I think, you know, another reason why I think there's every chance that the city of culture thing can work here, because rather than being that highbrow, Bradford is sort of decided lowbrow. I'm not saying that in any way of criticism whatsoever. I think it's a strength that it isn't about opera and ballet and all those things. It is about genuine arts that people can engage with and can enjoy. So I think there's every chance it'll succeed. One of the lovely things about Francis Laidler, by the way, is there used to be a note in the performers saying basically don't go asking for free tickets for your mates, because if your friends and family won't pay. So it's named after the Alhambra in Spain, which means Red Castle or Fort, the Alhambra, and it is beautiful internally, externally. It is fabulous. So it went to liquidation in the 60s, but the council bought it, so it's now run as part of Bradford, which is lovely. The same isn't necessarily true of this one, because this here, Bradford Live, was intended to be the kind of the focal point of the UK City of Culture. It's the former Odeon of Bradford, and it was going to be taken over, bought initially by the council, handed over to the NEC Entertainment Group. And again, careful what I say, not going to get sued. But they were going to come in and operate this as a live music venue to really sort of supplement the kind of live and nighttime economy. But for whatever reason, that has now hit a pause. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm not qualified to comment on what's happened or who did what, who said what. But as yet, it is a promise unfulfilled. So what should have been the kind of centre point of this year of culture, at the moment, lies fallow. But I think that substantially an awful lot of work's been done. They've kind of recently released photos and drone stuff, if you look at it internally. So hopefully another operator or some other model of operation will be found soon, and they're about to bring this on board, because you can see really it's a long way towards completion. So hopefully somebody can knock heads together, they can make that work. Look at how now the City Hall is looking. So I think we'll go over there to kind of finish. I was going to take us into Sunbridge Wells, but we're a bit late on the tour, and I need to, the traffic is building. My apologies that we started late, but hopefully those that have stuck around feel like we've had our money's worth. So yeah, next time we go, we'll go to Sunbridge Wells, which is an incredible place. Not Tunbridge Wells, Sunbridge Wells, and it's basically it's a series of caves and tunnels under Bradford, because as you notice, all this is built on stone, and there's a quarry here in the medieval period. So it is basically there's a series of tunnels, like mines if you like, go right the way underneath the city, and in 2016 it opened up as a major kind of new retail and leisure destination, whereby all these kind of tunnels you can kind of go through, and there's bars and restaurants and so forth, and some retail. Mostly, as I say, it's focused on hospitality. I think they're kind of wanting to rebalance that a bit more towards retail, but it's still pretty new. So again, these are the opportunities kind of Bradford has got. I mean, who else has got a subterranean of tunnels and caves? Bradford has. There is so much of this stuff, isn't there? There's having the ideas, there's having the political leadership, and there's having a supportive business community and forthcoming investment. A mix of the private capital and public seed fund cash. And if they kind of put those things together, there's every reason to believe that this is a city that can fly. I mean, not least because unlike most of the Yorkshire that is condemned to slow retreat because of an ageing population, Bradford's got the opposite. It's got a really young, youthful population here. So there is the potential to do something different, and those that have historically sort of sneered a bit, looked down on Bradford, may have to eat their words, I think, because if we can, as I say, just get that triangulation right, mixing vision, ambition, political leadership, business contribution, all in the same direction, which is easier said than done, they can do great things here. Because I don't think there's anywhere else that could offer the quality of the buildings, and that so much of it is underutilised right now. So you don't need to build vastly more to make it work, and it all sits really ultimately here in the political H-clue with City Hall. So the City Hall is the third of these wonderful buildings by our famous architect, Mawson. It dates from to kind of really fill this space. You've got a Venetian tower. It is utterly magnificent. Everything about it is just to the max, really. I mean, it's extended at the beginning of the 20th century, but in a very sensitive way, and there's so much to love about the City Hall. And I say it's down to them now. It's down to the politics to find a way, I think, to make this work. But, you know, amongst these tensions and the more noisy, stupid idiot gobbing off people, you know, telling us all about immigration and the problems with it, is pulling us further away from the core issue, which is what can we achieve when we work together, rather than separate. But unfortunately, this is an era of separation, of division, which isn't going to be helpful in a place like Bradford. But, like I say, if anybody can do it, I think this place could. It's just got something that you can't find elsewhere. And of course, I'm saying that it's got things that York hasn't got. But it's got a lot to love. There's so much to love about Bradford. And I'm cautiously optimistic. And so I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to bring us back later in the year, because I want to bring you, show you the pool, show it all lit up on a night, because it looks magnificent. We'll see the highest waterfalls, 100 feet waterfalls, sort of shooting up, show you all illuminated. But right now, of course, probably because of the weather, the mirror pool is not in operation, or maybe it's because of the events that have been on for the launch. But either way, this pool, you know, isn't there. So I want to bring you back and show you that. But equally, as I say, we'll go to Saltaire. We'll perhaps go and have a look at Lister Mills and Cartwright Hall, up that way, up at Manningham. And I'll try and give you a real kind of flavour of Bradford across the year. And hopefully, the next time you hear about Bradford, you'll be hearing about good news stories, about how the City of Culture has given it the impetus to fly to new heights. So I'm going to leave you here with the tower there pointing upwards, because I think it symbolises really what's on offer, the opportunity that's there if the people, the politicians, the business community and the government could come together to make it happen. So apologies for one or two false starts, loss of microphone, late start, etc., etc. That's been a nuisance, but I hope it hasn't detracted from it. And it's brilliant to bring you here to see at the beginning of this Year of Culture. And I say very, very happy to cut off, to come again and make good on the bits that we kind of missed out on. So from Bradford, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you everybody who has left a contribution. It is most helpful, as you can imagine, driving and parking and the 2 days spent writing and researching, to hopefully bring something of value, of education. Those that can't, of course, we appreciate that when you can, you'll be able to. For everybody else, thank you so much for your financial support. It means a huge amount. And it's lovely to be back with our first brand new destination of 2025, and look forward to bringing you some more in due course. So thank you. You can all go back now and watch the beginning for those that missed it, and probably skip over the first 15 minutes because it's a bit kind of patchy, I think, at the audio and stuff. But anyway, be there very, very soon. So thank you, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.